Donald Trump, quote, "We don't need anything from Canada." Donald Trump, quote, "Let's approve a pipeline." What are we to make of that?
Well, it makes that he doesn't seem to stick to his messaging all the time. I think what Donald Trump likes is what benefits the U.S. And listen, their relationship with Canada benefits them. Our relationship with the U.S. benefits us. We are intertwined. We always have been intertwined. So this idea that both countries can operate in this silo of independence is kind of a bit of a fantasy.
For months, Trump said America doesn't need Canada. But now, something changed. A new pipeline will bring huge amounts of Canadian oil into the US every day. Canada wins big, selling more oil and gaining power, while America quietly depends on the very country it claimed it didn't need. The tariffs were imposed to back that message up. The annexation language was deployed to reinforce it. The suggestion that Canada is the 51st state was presented as a rhetorical expression of American dominance over a dependent neighbor. And then, Trump signed a presidential permit authorizing the Bridger Pipeline expansion, a project that will carry hundreds of thousands of barrels of Canadian crude oil per day across the Montana border and into Wyoming's refinery. Infrastructure. There is a very specific word for the relationship between what Trump has been saying and what Trump just did. The word is contradiction. And the contradiction is not subtle. We don't need anything from Canada, followed by let's approve a pipeline, does not require sophisticated analysis to interpret. It requires only the willingness to place both statements next to each other and observe what they reveal about the gap between the rhetoric and the operational reality of what the United States actually requires to function. The energy relationship between Canada and the United States is not incidental or peripheral. It is structural. Canada supplies approximately 60% of all American crude oil imports. Midwest refineries, Gulf Coast facilities, and industrial operations across the American heartland are built around the specific grades of heavy crude that Alberta's oil sands produce. The pipelines, the refinery configurations, the price mechanisms, all of it was constructed around Canadian supply over decades of integration that proceeded precisely because the economics were so compelling. You do not build that infrastructure because you do not need the other country. You build it because you do need the other country. And the physical reality of that need does not change when a social media post says otherwise. What the Bridger Pipeline approval does, beyond its immediate capacity and economic implications, is expose the gap between the administration's stated position and its revealed preference. Stated position: the United States is energy independent and does not need Canadian supply. Revealed preference: approve a major new infrastructure project that will carry up to 550,000 barrels of Canadian oil per day into the American refinery system. In negotiations, the distance between what a counterpart says and what a counterpart does is the most important information available. It tells you where the actual constraints are, what the actual needs are, and how much pressure the stated position can actually sustain before the operational reality breaks through. Canada's response to this approval has been measured, deliberate, and strategically framed in a way that is significantly more sophisticated than a simple victory claim. Carney placed the pipeline within a broader context, one that emphasizes options, alternatives, and the active expansion of Canadian market access to Asia. The approval was not dismissed, but it was also not treated as a concession that should produce Canadian gratitude or negotiating softness. Instead, it was folded into a narrative that makes Canada's position stronger rather than more accommodating. The Iran war's disruption of Middle Eastern energy supply is central to that framing. The Strait of Hormuz closure removed approximately 20% of global oil supply from accessible markets and simultaneously shut down a major portion of Qatari LNG capacity. The countries that had been most dependent on Gulf energy, Japan, South Korea, India, were suddenly in acute supply shortage with reserves measured in days. Those countries are now seeking long-term supply contracts from geopolitically stable producers whose export routes do not pass through active conflict zones. Canada has a Pacific pipeline running to the coast. Canada has an LNG terminal in Kitimat shipping to Asian markets. Canada has a deep-water Arctic port in Churchill that is being modernized for Atlantic shipping. Every one of those routes is available right now at a moment of maximum global demand for exactly what Canada produces. The strategic lesson Carney has articulated is direct. The Iran war proved the need for energy security, and Canada's geographic position and resource base make it the most logical long-term answer to that need for allied nations across Asia and Europe. That is not just an energy argument, it is a leverage argument. Because every barrel Canada sells to Japan or India or South Korea at global market rates is a barrel that does not need to flow south at whatever discount American buyers have historically been able to impose. Because there was nowhere else for it to go. The Bridger permit adds US export capacity. Canada's Pacific and Atlantic infrastructure adds Asian and European export capacity. More buyers means better prices. Better prices mean less dependence on any single customer's terms. The domestic Canadian political complication that surfaced in the same period underscores why disciplined positioning matters so much at this moment. A group of conservative MPs, led by Jamil Javani, undertook a visit to Washington outside the formal negotiating framework. The criticism from the Canadian side was substantive, not because engagement with American officials is inherently problematic, but because in high-stakes negotiations with an unpredictable counterpart, clarity of representation is itself a strategic asset. When multiple channels are sending different signals to the same interlocutors, the coherence of Canada's negotiating position erodes. The Americans dealing with formal Canadian negotiators begin to wonder whether the formal channel reflects the real Canadian position or whether informal visitors are carrying different messages. That ambiguity, however unintentionally created, is not neutral. It is a vulnerability. Carney's response captured the principle without escalating the rhetoric. Both countries are free. People can travel where they wish. But the authority to negotiate on behalf of Canada rests with the government of Canada. And the American interlocutors are generous with their time when hosting various Canadians who come to Washington, but in the end, they know who the actual negotiators are. That is a restatement of discipline expressed with enough diplomatic grace to avoid unnecessary conflict with opposition politicians, while leaving no ambiguity about where the formal authority resides. The broader pattern this moment reveals is one that transcends the specific details of the Bridger pipeline or the conservative Washington trip. The United States, under the current administration, has been operating from a posture of assertive rhetoric combined with tactical inconsistency. The rhetoric projects independence and strength. The policy decisions reveal dependence and need. When a negotiating counterpart begins to see that gap clearly, when they can point to a pipeline approval that directly contradicts the "we don't need anything from Canada" messaging the pressure tool built on, the independence narrative loses credibility. Credibility in any negotiation is itself a form of leverage. And leverage that depends on the other side believing something they can empirically disprove is leverage with a structural weakness. Canada's evolving strategy responds to this reality with a consistent internal logic. Diversification reduces the degree to which any single relationship can be used as a pressure instrument. The Asian LNG contracts, the Enbridge Sunrise expansion, the Shell $22 billion Montney investment, the Bridger pipeline capacity heading south, the Defense Security and Resilience Bank headquarters confirmed in Montreal, the NATO AWACS contract, going to Saab Bombardier, all of these are components of a single coherent strategy that builds Canadian optionality across every dimension simultaneously. More buyers, more routes, more institutional relationships, more investment, more alternatives. That is what the Bridger pipeline approval, read correctly, actually says. The United States needs Canadian oil enough to approve major new cross-border infrastructure during an active trade war, during ongoing tariff disputes, during customer review negotiations, and during a period when the administration has been publicly insisting it needs nothing from Canada. Carney did not rush to claim this as a win. He placed it in context. That is the posture of a negotiator who understands that the most useful thing about a contradiction is not celebrating it, it is remembering it, and using what it reveals the next time someone at the table says the United States does not need anything from Canada.